The first thing I noticed was the door, not what was on it, what was missing from it. I had driven 2 hours to reach the house, a house on a street that looks like every other street in the mid-sized American city where it sits, lawns mowed, a basketball hoop in the driveway, a neighbor's car with a faded parish school sticker on the rear window. The mother who contacted me had spent 3 weeks trying to find someone who would actually come. She had called the diocese. She had been given a phone number that rang without answer. She had called a priest in her parish who told her that what she was describing was probably depression and that her son should see a therapist. She had called another priest who came once, left quickly, and did not return her calls. She was not hysterical. She was a woman at the end of 3 weeks of something she did not have language for. When I parked and walked toward the front door, I noticed the door frame. A small nail was still in the wood above the lintel, just to the right, slightly rusted. Something had hung there once. Maybe a palm blessed on a previous Palm Sunday, the kind that curls brown and brittle by October. Maybe a small crucifix. Whatever it had been, it was gone. The paint around the nail was slightly lighter. Whatever had hung there for years before being taken down. Below the doorknob, on the left side of the frame, there was a small smear that might have been holy water once, dried and faint. I stood on that threshold for a moment. Just stood. I went in. What I am about to tell you is a composite account. All the clinical details have been rearranged to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. I want to be clear about that at the outset. The spiritual and pastoral observations are my own, drawn from many years of this work. The doctrinal content is the teaching of the Church. The case itself, as I present it, is the kind of case, not a specific case tied to specific individuals. My name is Chad Ripperger. I was ordained to the priesthood in 1996. I hold a doctorate in philosophy from the Pontifical Faculty. For 400 years, the Church provided the laity with specific prayers to address situations in their homes that they could not explain. Most parishes stopped teaching them after 1965. Now, they have all been compiled into a concise, practical guide. Keep it near the door and read the first page tonight. You will find the link to get the book in the description and in the first pinned comment. Of Philosophy and Theology of the Immaculate Conception, and the philosophical tradition I work within is Thomistic, meaning I take Aquinas' rational metaphysics as the framework for understanding what I encounter in this ministry, rather than any contemporary framework that finds the category of spiritual reality embarrassing or imprecise. I did not seek out exorcism work. I was assigned to it by my superiors after some years of priestly ministry, trained under a senior exorcist with decades of experience, and I have spent the time since working cases, training other priests, and trying to put into writing the things the faithful need to know before the situation becomes severe. I have taught for years that the most important question in the spiritual life is not what extraordinary things happen in extreme cases. The most important question is whether the ordinary protections are in place. The extraordinary cases I deal with are almost always the result of the ordinary protections being absent. Remove the ordinary first. The extraordinary fills the space. That is what I had been called to here in this house, with the empty door frame and the rusted nail. The boy was 16. I will not give him a name. He was thin in the way that happens when someone has not been sleeping well for months, a hollowed thinness, not an athletic one. He was sitting in an armchair when I came into the living room. His mother sat on the sofa to his left. His father was in the kitchen doorway. The father had not wanted me to come. He was a man who had left the church in his late 20s and had been living at a sustained low-grade embarrassment about his wife's continued practice for the intervening years. He stood in that kitchen doorway with his arms crossed and his face arranged into the expression of someone attending a procedure he considers medically unnecessary but is tolerating out of spousal courtesy. I noted all of this. Context is clinical data. The boy looked at me. His eyes were not what the movies promise. There was no red, no rolling, no dramatic dilation. The most accurate thing I can say is that they were flat. There is a light that exists in a person's eyes that has nothing to do with the optics of the eyeball. It is a quality of presence, of someone being behind the eyes rather than just a face pointed at you. That quality was not present. The eyes were open, the pupils reactive when I tested them later, everything physiologically normal. But the presence that should have been behind them had, in some functional sense, vacated or been pushed to the periphery. I have seen this in a number of cases. It is one of the things I watch for. The temperature in the room was lower than the rest of the house, not dramatically, a few degrees. The kind of thing you notice at the back of the neck. I sat down across from him and I talked to the mother first in front of him about ordinary things: when he had last slept, when he had last eaten a full meal, how long this had been going on. 8 months, she said, 8 months since the change, that she could not describe except to say that he was not himself and had not been himself since last autumn. He watched me during this conversation. Then he spoke in his own voice. It was his voice at this point, and he said, "You can't do anything here." I said, "I know that. I can't. The church can." He did not respond to that. Something shifted behind the flat eyes, then it settled. The mother poured tea while we spoke. She carried 2 mugs from the kitchen and set them on the coffee table between us, and the gesture was so ordinary, so domestic, a woman in a cardigan with a mug. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote more than a dozen questions on how fallen angels operate. Most Catholics have never read one line of it. This archive gathers that teaching, the 1,614 rite, and 4 centuries of documented cases into a single reference. Read it slowly, 1 chapter a night. You will find the link to get the book in the description and in the first posted comment. Tea at 11 in the morning, that I felt the weight of what was happening in that ordinary room with its ordinary furniture. A votive candle burned on a shelf behind her in front of a small printed image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. That candle and that image were the only explicitly Catholic objects visible in the living room. The rest of the room was the visual vocabulary of 10,000 American houses. The television mounted on the wall, the family photographs, the throw blanket on the couch arm, the remote control on the armrest. The home had not made up its mind about what it was. She told me about the previous 8 months in the careful, exhausted language of someone who has rehearsed the story many times and stopped expecting to be believed. The nighttime sounds, the objects that moved, not dramatically, not like the movies again, but small things. A glass set on the counter that was in a different position in the morning. A key that she was certain she had put on the hook and that appeared later on the floor across the kitchen. Her son's sleep, which had gone from normal to fractured to essentially absent over a period of 3 months. The way he spoke differently, not in the dramatic register, not with the Latin, not yet, but with a flatness, a distance, as though there were 2 layers of glass between him and whatever was being said to him. He had stopped going to school in February. They had taken him to a psychiatrist in March. The psychiatrist had prescribed medication. The medication had not changed anything she could observe. I asked her when they had last been to Mass as a family. She looked at the votive candle. She said, before the separation proceedings started. That was 3 years ago. She still went occasionally, she said, by herself when she had the energy. The boy had not been to Mass since his confirmation. I wrote none of this down. I carry a small notebook, but I did not use it. Some things you do not write down in front of people who are already frightened. You keep them in the part of your mind that has learned over years to hold details without displaying them. The father had not moved from the kitchen doorway. He was watching me the way a man watches a plumber who is about to tell him something expensive. Now I want to explain doctrinally what I was looking at, because the explanation is not separate from the story. It is the story's grammar. St. Thomas Aquinas, in the Summa Theologiae, first part, questions 50 through 64, works out in careful, rational terms what angels are. He begins from Aristotle, the metaphysics of substance, form, and matter, and then builds on it with revelation. The angels are pure intellects, subsistent forms without matter. This is critical. Matter is the principle of individuation in Thomistic metaphysics. Angels do not have matter, so each angel is its own species. Each is in itself a complete kind of being, not a member of a class. There are not many angels of the same type. Each one is unrepeatable. This means the fallen angels, the demons, are not a mob. They are a hierarchy of radically individuated intelligences, each one with a complete and unrepeatable rational nature, and each one, by Aquinas' analysis, retaining that nature fully after the fall. What they lost at the moment of irrevocable refusal was sanctifying grace and the happiness that comes with the beatific vision. What they retained was their entire natural endowment, their intellect, their will now locked in a refusal that they cannot reverse, because their choice was made with the full clarity that only a purely intellectual nature can have, without the confusion and revision that matter introduces into human choosing. What this means practically: a demon that has been observing a particular family, a particular neighborhood, a particular pattern of sacramental abandonment for 30 years is not guessing when it moves. It is calculating with an intelligence that exceeds human capacity at the level of natural reason. It knows the pressure points, it knows the schedule, it knows that the father in the kitchen doorway left the church at 27 and carries guilt about it that he has never confessed because he has never returned to the sacraments. That guilt is a door. The 6 categories of diabolic interference with the human person, which classical demonology distinguishes, are these: in ascending severity, temptation, which is universal; vexation or oppression, which is external assault on the body or circumstances; obsession, which is the persistent external siege of the imagination and the exterior faculties; infestation, which is diabolic occupation of a place, an object, or the environment surrounding a person; subjugation, which involves a covenantal arrangement freely entered, whether knowingly or not; and possession, which is the temporary occupation of the body's faculties by a foreign will. The boy was not possessed. I want to say this clearly. What I assessed over the 3 days I was in contact with that household was a combination of oppression, obsession, and infestation, the last of these. The infestation concentrated most specifically on the threshold of the house, the entry point, the door. 3 days is not long. 3 days in a case like this is reconnaissance, not resolution. I was there to assess, to perform what initial rites were authorized, to prescribe the sacramental and practical steps the family needed to take, and to do what I could do without overstepping the authorization I had been given. On the second evening, after the Liturgy of the Hours and the preliminary rites, the voice changed. This was during what is technically the interrogatory phase, the part of the formal rite in which the exorcist questions the afflicted person and, under the authority of the church, demands specific information from whatever is present. The voice that came was not his. Lower than his natural register, by an interval that is hard to describe, not deeper in the way a grown man's voice is deeper than an adolescent's, but deeper in the way that old wood sounds when you knock on it compared to new wood. Old. The word that keeps coming is old. And in Latin, not classical Latin with clean vowels, but something older, a cadence I recognize from the Roman ritual of 1614, the ritual of Paul V, which is the rite I use, a phrase that roughly translates as, "You have nothing to offer here. This one is ours. The door was opened and not closed." St. Peter, the first letter, 5th chapter, 8th verse. "Be sober and watch, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, goeth about seeking whom he may devour." The word in the Douay rhymes that carries the most weight there is watch, gregore in the Greek. Be vigilant, be awake. The image in the original is of a lion who prowls the perimeter looking for the weak point in the fence, not crashing through the fence, walking along it, looking. The threshold of a house is, in the spiritual topology that the church has always understood, a real and material point that is also a spiritual one. You mark the perimeter, you mark the threshold, you declare it.